Hello and welcome back to Stones That Speak. Today I want to talk to you about one of the weirder things in the Bible. Actually, several weird things in the Bible. This is part of a thought process I've been going through ever since the video I made about the Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper. I've been trying to really grapple with, in a meaningful way, what that ceremony, ritual thing means and how to understand it. I come from a Protestant tradition which sort of always talked about it as it's just a metaphor, which the word metaphor has sort of lost almost all meaning for me at this point, so I'm not even sure I can fully articulate, but I think basically it's just saying it means something, but it doesn't do anything, is maybe the best way to articulate that. And that was always for me set up as a contrast against what I understand, or at least have understood to be the Catholic position, which is that it is a literal physical transformation of one thing into another thing. And maybe those are the only two viable options, but I've been sort of noodling around with different Bible stories and trying to understand this, and I came across several examples, but I'm gonna focus in on one kind of example. There's several families of examples that we could go to, but for the sake of this part of the conversation, I'm going to talk about, at least starting off, I'm going to talk about Jesus healing the blind man by spitting in the dirt. So let's just start off by reading that story. I have it pulled up here. It says, "And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?'" We're not going to get into that part. We're going somewhere here, but we'll read this anyway. Jesus answered, "Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." We just skipped over a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not going to talk about, but it's all good stuff. All right. "When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is by interpretation sent. "He went therefore and washed, and came seeing." What a weird story. Now, I have to admit, as I was noodling over this in my head, I had confused this story with the story where Jesus spits directly in the blind man's eyes and he heals him by portions, and that's a great story too, but I haven't fully unpacked all of that yet. There's a cool thing about like the creation and the light that was first created, and then the sun and moon that are created later, and the concept of light, and then the instantiation of light, and the men like trees walking, and then he sees fully. Not going there. That's not what today's video is about. We're going to talk about this concept of spitting in the dirt. Why does Jesus spit into the dirt? What does this do? Because our idea of the miracles that Jesus could do in the modern day, we think, okay, Jesus is God. God can do anything. So Jesus could just snap his fingers. Now, Jesus never is recorded in the Gospels as having snapped his fingers. In fact, I don't even know if that was a thing in Bible days. I'm just now wondering, like, who was the first person to snap their fingers? It's not recorded in the scripture, as far as I can remember, and he certainly doesn't do it to heal anybody. Sometimes he speaks and says, "Be healed," and that's the way he does it. But there's certainly, from a sort of arbitrary Jesus is God perspective, there's nothing stopping him from just doing the thing. just saying, be healed. And then the guy was healed. But that's not what Christ does. That's not how he does things a lot of the time. Almost always, and probably every single time. He's participating in a story. He's participating in a larger pattern. And instantiating that down into the healing of an individual person that's recorded, but also it's not just recorded so that we can know that Jesus heals people, but so that we can see something about how we are healed. And what he is doing, I believe, when he spits into the dirt is related to another passage. In fact, there's several of these passages, but I'm going to go to this one here in Leviticus, I think. Oh, my thing ain't working. Hold on one second. There it is. Okay. Is this Leviticus? I forget. Numbers. Numbers chapter 5. I pulled it up and then I forgot where it was. It says in verse 11, and this is another weird one, right? You probably thought, okay, the spitting in the dust is weird. This one's going to be weird too. And it's also going to have some stuff that we're going to skip, partly because I don't even understand all of it. But we'll read this whole passage anyway. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any man's wife go aside, and commit a trespass against him, and a man lie with her carnally, and it be hid from the eyes of her husband, and be kept close, and she be defiled, and there be no witness against her, neither she be taken with the manner, that means she don't get pregnant, and the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be defiled, or if the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be not defiled, then shall the man bring his wife unto the priest, and he shall bring her offering for her, the 10th part of an ephah of barley meal. He shall pour no oil on it, or put frankincense thereon, for it is an offering of jealousy, an offering of memorial, bringing iniquity to remembrance. So here's what's going on. This guy has this woman that he thinks is cheating on him, but he got no proof. Didn't catch her in the act. She ain't got pregnant. There's nobody saw them. She didn't admit it. All right, so he's like, he's filled up with his jealousy, and he brings her to the priest, and he has this offering for her. There's probably stuff about the offering that I could talk about. I'm not smart enough to talk about that right now, so we're just going to leave it be. We're going to continue with the passage. And the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord. And the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, and of the dust that is in the floor of the tabernacle, the priest shall take and put it into the water. And the priest shall set the woman before the Lord, and uncover the woman's head, and put the offering of memorial in her hands, which is the jealousy offering, and the priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that causeth the curse. And the priest shall charge her by an oath, and say unto the woman, If no man have laid with thee, and if thou hast gone aside to uncleanness with another instead of thy husband, be thou free from this bitter water that causeth the curse. But if thou hast gone aside to another instead of thy husband, and if thou be defiled, and some man have laid with thee beside thy husband, then the priest shall charge the woman with an oath of cursing, and the priest shall say unto the woman, The Lord make thee a curse and an oath among thy people, when the Lord doth make thy thigh to rot, and thy belly to swell. And this water that causeth the curse shall go into thy bowels, to make thy belly to swell, and thy thigh to rot. And the woman shall say, Amen, amen. And the priest shall write these curses in a book, and he shall blot them out with the bitter water. There's so much going on here that, again, I'm not qualified to understand, all right? But we're going to, I want to get to the end of this passage, and I don't want to skip over this so that, you know, for my own ego's sake, and just tell you the parts of the story that I get, okay? He shall cause the woman to drink the bitter water that causeth the curse, and the water that causeth the curse shall enter into her and become bitter. Then the priest shall take the jealousy offering out of the woman's hand, and shall wave the offering before the Lord, and offer it upon the altar. And the priest shall take an handful of the offering, even the memorial thereof, and burn it upon the altar, and afterward shall cause the woman to drink the water. This is super important. Makes her swear by an oath that, you know, if she's been guilty, then she's gonna, you know, have this curse come upon her. And if she's not, then the curse will pass from her, and she has to drink this water that is mingled water and dust. Now don't forget the theme here, right? Because we started off with Jesus healing a blind man, putting water, that is his spittle, down into the dirt to make clay. And when he hath made her to drink the water, then it shall come to pass that, if she be defiled, and have done trespass against her husband, that the water that causeth the curse shall enter into her and become bitter, and her belly shall swell, and her thighs shall rot, and the woman shall be a curse among her people. And here's the kicker. Here's the part that I read a couple months ago, and I'd never thought of this before, but it hit me. This last verse in this section says, and if the woman be not defiled, but be clean, then she shall be free, and shall conceive seed. Now, there are some other translations, some of which choose to render this as she will be able to conceive seed, but I ain't reading those translations, and I looked around at what I'm able to understand of the original language, and I don't think that this is actually a bad translation. This woman, if she is righteous, if she has done well, and this accusation that her husband is bringing against her is not in good faith, right? If it is just jealousy, and that'll happen, right? Then when she drinks this water, under these circumstances, it will be to her an opportunity to conceive. Like, it's not beyond the obvious, the participation of the husband and the physical processes that all go on there, but it's saying this water will produce in her something of a regeneration, right? She will be guaranteed, if she has been, wrongfully accused, to produce a son with this water that has gone inside of her. If it doesn't, if she's incorrectly aligned with, let's say, with the will of God, or with, the things that she ought to be doing, with the pattern of reality that she's supposed to be following, if she's incorrectly aligned with all that stuff, then it's a curse to her. Then it rots out all of her reproductive organs, essentially, is what it's saying. That she won't, not only will she not have a child, but she will never be able to have a child, because she's hidden this thing and she's kept it from her husband. And so what is going on here? I think that what is going on is that in both of these instances, what you're dealing with is a return to the waters that existed in the world before creations. The Genesis 1:1 talks about, or 1:2, I forget which one, but there's these water that was upon the face of the deep, right, or the face of the waters, and there's this no form and void. So there's this mixed up water, and later on in Genesis, there's land that's made to appear out of the water. So in the beginning, there's the water and the land are all mixed up together. The solid and the wet are not distinguished yet. And this is the thing that God descends into to create the world that we see around us. And what is happening, I believe, in both this passage in Numbers and in the incident of the miracle of this man who's born blind, is that these waters of creation, this mixture of water and land, that is, as Numbers talks about, it's a bitter mixture, right? You don't want to be in this water. And the other waters that you could imagine is salt water, right? That there would sort of be the standard bitter water, as if the water has salt in it. It's not really good to drink. But this woman's going to drink it. And this mud that's going onto this man's eye, it's not really, good for anything. But it's this chaos that is yearning for form. I recently watched a video with John Vervaeke and Paul Vanderklay, and John Vervaeke talked about this sense of chaos from the early Greek idea of the world, the thing that is hungering for form, and I think that is what is being described in Genesis 1. That there is this formless thing, but it's waiting for God to come down and impart something good into it, to impart this direction into it. You can think of it kind of like a box of Legos. When you look into a box of Legos, they may be scattered around and mixed up and not in any particular order. But you can tell that they're supposed to be put together in some way, that they're supposed to be a better arrangement for these Legos. And so you're almost naturally drawn to snapping them together, trying to make a robot or an airplane or some dude or a house. You know, they're yearning for form. They are calling out to be formed into something. Legos are not meant to sit in the box just in a scatter. Their whole purpose in the world is to be formed into something useful. And so in the case of the jealous husband, that form that is going to be taken, it's if there's no divine spark, right? If there's this taint of sin, then it gets twisted into destruction, and it eats everything that it is in its path. But crucially important, the other side of that coin is, if it is entered into correctly by someone who has been doing their duty and fulfilling what they were supposed to fulfill, then it will produce new life. Now, Jesus does the same thing. He is returning, essentially taking part in this story of creation. He makes these waters of chaos that existed all the way back in Genesis 1, and he says these wanted to be something. There's also the clay that is used to create Adam. I think that there is a good juxtaposition there, but this mixture of water and earth, of sea and earth almost, and the waters that come down from above is important too. That this is the thing that participates in the story pattern of that chaotic water that was formed into everything that exists all the way back in Genesis 1. Now, is this a miracle? In both cases, yes. But it's not a scientific transformation of these waters through some weird time vortex thing that reaches back into time and brings back forward these waters of chaos into the temple where the jealous husband is, or in Jesus' case, the dirt where he spits, and he just sort of makes it look like that. That's not what's going on. We're not dealing with the alchemical, magical, I don't know how to describe what the literal sense of this would be, that he really went back and got the waters of chaos. Well, no. But yes. The clay that Jesus creates in this case is participating in that pattern of the waters of chaos. It is able to be used in that pattern, that the waters of chaos were able to be used in the healing. And you can also see this pattern at several other places, most notably in the pool. I forget the name of the pool, but there is the story of the man who is healed by the pool, where the angel comes down and he troubles the waters. Right? Now, this is not a mixture of earth and water, but it is formless waters, right? It is this sense of these waters being bubbling up, right? There's this chaos introduced into the waters. Normally, it's just a flat pool, right? But first of all, you have an angel. It's very important to remember that there is a spiritual influence that is taking place here. It's not just some water that is being churned up, that there is a sense that there is a spiritual cause to this water being churned up, being turned into these chaotic thing, as there was in the temple and as there is in Jesus' healing. And so when people are able to enter into this chaotic water, they are healed from their infirmities. Now, in the story of Jesus healing the man in this case, the man is not able to enter the water. There's a limitation, but you still see that the people at this time were living in this world of pattern where chaotic water, this mixture, this water that's not well defined, is able to bring about healing. And again, we're not talking about some sense that we're traveling back in time and getting some of that water from the creation. It's just that water that participates in that pattern participates in that pattern in all the ways. That if this water that is chaotically unordered can be entered into in the correct way, that it will create order in a good sense. And in the case of the pool that is troubled by the angel, it creates healing for many people. And in the case of Jesus spitting in the dirt, it creates sight for this blind man. Great story, by the way. If you haven't read this story of the blind man, it goes on. It's kind of one of the comic interludes of the Gospels. Highly recommended. Where the Pharisees are getting really irritated with this guy, and he didn't see Jesus, so he's just like, I don't know who healed me. It's cool though. Why are you guys mad about this Jesus dude? But I wanted to point out that this pattern plays out at least in one other place in the Gospels, in my opinion. Because we have in the Gospels, so I've mentioned already two patterns where the waters of chaos, this mixture of solid and wet, brings forth something good. But there is an instance where it brings forth death, in the same way that it brings forth death in Numbers, right? For those who are not participating correctly in the pattern of God's will, let's say, this mixture of dry land and sea is a curse. And this, I think, is what is happening when Jesus, at the Last Supper, dips the sop and gives it to Judas. What is he doing? He's about to take he's about to enter into communion and say, "Take, eat, this is my body, and here is the bread on the one hand, and here is the wine on the other hand." We have these two things, they're separate. You have the dry land and you have the sea, all right? Both of these are separated. They're both good in their context, and so take them, and they are part of this new creation in my body. But for Judas, what does he do? He takes the dry land, the bread, and he places it back down into the wet, all right? The soup that they have there, the sop, right? He dips the bread into that soup and he gives it to Judas and says, "Go do what you're going to do." Well, after the pattern of Numbers, chapter 9, I believe, I don't think it's chapter 9 actually, but whichever chapter in Numbers we just read, Judas has not been faithful. He is unfaithful. He has been entered into by Satan, in much the same way that the jealous husband was worried that his wife had been entered into by another man. Judas has taken on the power of Satan into himself, and he has succumbed to this temptation to betray Christ. What do we see that happens to Judas? Well, one of the accounts of his death includes him hanging, right? So there's a curse for those who hang on a tree. But also, in the book of Acts, it mentions that he falls into a field and his bowels burst asunder. And so the fulfillment of the curse from Numbers is played out in Judas. In fact, it's the only place I can think of where you have, and again, you might say, well, this is really a stretch. So if you don't believe that, then there's no individual instance of this. But Judas does play out this pattern that his belly becomes unfruitful, right? He is burst asunder. His belly does not bring forth living waters as the child of God is supposed to do. Instead, it brings forth death. It bursts out into this field of blood that is not able to be used for anything, right? The field can't be sown in now because it's a field of blood. It has to be only for poor people to be buried in. So Judas's death, his belly becomes a source of unlife. It kills off the possibility for this field to grow because it's a field of blood. That's the pattern. That, I think, is why Jesus spits in the dirt to heal the blind man. He's taking part in this story. He's playing along with the story. He's repeating these things over and over in a lot of different ways. I mean, almost all of the stories of Jesus, you can see him doing this. When he goes across the sea, for instance, to the man in the tombs, right? That's just an image of him going down into death, as he will in the future, to bring out those who are dead in the tombs, right? To say, to set things right. There's a storm there. There's the waters of chaos. There's the death. He's taking part in the Exodus. He's going across the sea, right? All of these things are incredibly intricately linked. And these stories are things that have to be participated in. Even Christ himself is not above participating in these stories, that he is living through recreations of all of these moments in history, that he is saying, I'm there, look at me, I'm back here, and I'm back here, and I'm back here. And to bring it back around to the Lord's Supper, I think that is what is going on. There is something that legitimately happens when you take part in the proper story of Christ's death and the taking part of his suffering. That you turn your eyes towards him, that you take his body and you take his blood, and it's not magical. I don't think. There's no chemical sense or even material sense in which the blood and the bread and the wine are transformed. But they do take part in the pattern in the same way that the spittle and the earth and the bread and the sop took part in the pattern of the waters of chaos all the way back to the creation. They do have an effect. This is the story verse that Christ lives in and invites us to live into. And the story has an effect on the physical world. This is how it always has been. John speaks of the beginning and he says, in the beginning was the Word. Just nakedly on its face from the English understanding of that, we know that a word is something that has meaning, and yet the meaning thing came before there was anything to be meant by it. There was nothing for the meaning to point to in the physical world. The physical world came after the meaning. The meaning was first. The story comes first. And when you participate in the story, the physical world falls into place in God's pattern. That's not instructions on how to heal people. I'm not saying if you go spit in the dirt and rub it in people's eyes that they'll become magically, able to see again. But I am saying that you do need to participate in the pattern of the story of Christ, especially in the ways that he has commanded, but in other ways as well. And I think that's what's going on with the Eucharist and the Lord's Supper, and why Jesus heals the blind man by spitting in the dirt. I'd love to hear what you think. I would especially love it if somebody has more further thoughts on the passage in Numbers, because as I was coming to this, I had sort of the cartoon version in my head where I remembered the pieces that were significant to my argument here. And boy, all the stuff about the writing in the book and the blotting out of the writing with the waters, but they're bitter waters, and the woman holding, and then she's got her hair uncovered, and that's all significant. And it's too much for me. But I'd love to hear if you have further thoughts on that, and I'll see you guys next time with something else. Take care.